I had always believed that anniversaries were meant to be celebrated with love, laughter, and the promise of forever. For 30 years, I thought I'd built exactly that, a marriage that could weather any storm. But what I didn't realize was that the real storm had been brewing under my roof all along, wearing the same smile I'd come to trust. It started with a missed call at midnight, a single innocuous beep that should have meant nothing. But sometimes, the smallest cracks reveal the deepest betrayals. And in the days that followed, I uncovered a truth so devastating that it threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew. This is the story of the day I discovered my husband's other family, and how I gave him an anniversary he'd never forget. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to stare betrayal in the face, then hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. Because tomorrow, I have something even more explosive waiting for you. You won't want to miss it. Now let's begin at the beginning. How a milestone anniversary became the catalyst for the greatest betrayal I'd ever known. They say the first year of marriage is the hardest, but I always thought the milestones were where the real tests came. The big birthdays, the anniversaries, 30 years of marriage. That was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to be a celebration of everything we'd built together. The home, the family, the memories. And so, when the calendar rolled around to that magical number, I decided to make it unforgettable. I started planning months in advance. I wanted every detail to be perfect, a testament to the love and loyalty that had kept us together all those years. I booked the best restaurant in town, the one with the candlelit tables and the string quartet in the corner, the one he'd always said was a little too fancy for every day. I ordered a cake decorated with white chocolate curls and fresh berries, just the way he liked it. I even arranged for a small group of our closest friends to surprise him at the end of the evening. The plan was simple. We'd have a quiet dinner together, just the two of us. Then, over dessert, our friends would appear, glasses raised, ready to toast to 3 decades of us. I could already picture his face lighting up, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he was genuinely happy. I wanted him to know how much he meant to me, to us. I scoured old photo albums for pictures of us over the years. Our wedding day, our first apartment, the messy kitchen where we'd painted the walls and gotten more on ourselves than on the drywall. I put them together in a slideshow set to our wedding song, the same one he'd sung softly in my ear the night we danced for the first time as husband and wife. Every day, I added small details, a bouquet of his favorite flowers, a bottle of the wine we'd discovered on our honeymoon. I even arranged for a babysitter for the grandchildren so that nothing would stand between us and our night together. It was going to be perfect. And in the middle of all that planning, every detail checked and double-checked, I found myself remembering the beginning. The way he'd looked at me across the room at that college party, all confidence and charm. The way he'd asked me out with that crooked smile that made my heart flutter. The way he'd held me the night I told him I was pregnant. The way he'd promised to always be there. I believed him. God, I believed him. Every time I found another detail to add, a handwritten card slipped into his jacket pocket, a pair of cufflinks engraved with our initials, I felt like I was reinforcing the foundation of us. Like I was patching every crack that time and stress and life had left behind. I wanted to make sure he knew. I was still here, and I still loved him. Blind trust. That's what it was, though I didn't see it then. I didn't see the cracks forming, the little things that didn't add up, the late nights at the office, the weekends away with old friends, the moments when he'd come home smelling like a perfume I didn't wear. I'd brushed them aside, chalked them up to stress or forgetfulness or the strain of work. After all, 30 years was a long time. People changed. Love changed. But I thought the foundation was strong. I thought we were unshakable. So I planned, and planned, and planned. I imagined the night 100 different ways, Him arriving with that smile, the candlelight reflecting in his eyes, his hand warm in mine as we toasted to us. 30 years, a lifetime, a milestone worth celebrating. Little did I know, I was planning the party that would shatter the illusion of my perfect marriage. Because what I didn't know, what I couldn't even begin to imagine, was that while I was busy planning a celebration, he was living a lie. A lie so big it would make our 30th anniversary the anniversary he'd regret for the rest of his life. It started with a missed call at midnight. So ordinary, so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Yet it was the first crack in the facade I'd spent 30 years building. I'd been in the kitchen, fussing with the final details of our anniversary slideshow, the one with the photos from our wedding day, our first house, the kids' first steps. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house as I arranged each image in perfect order, smiling at the memories. That's when I heard it. The faint vibration of his phone on the kitchen counter. I'd plugged it in for him earlier, a small kindness in the long list of small kindnesses that had defined our marriage. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see a spam text or maybe one of his late-night sports updates. But what I saw instead made my heart stutter. Missed call. 12:03 a.m. Brianna. A woman's name. One I'd never heard before. My first reaction was confusion. Mark didn't have a sister named Brianna. No cousin, no coworker that I'd ever heard him mention in all our years together. I told myself it was probably nothing. An old friend, a misdial, a work colleague I hadn't met. That's what I told myself as I turned back to my laptop, trying to focus on the smiling faces frozen in time. But my mind wouldn't let it go. Brianna. Why would she be calling him after midnight? I glanced at the phone again, the screen now dark, as if it had secrets to keep. A chill crept up my spine. I reminded myself that trust was the cornerstone of a marriage. I'd spent decades building that trust, reassuring him when work got tough, staying up late to help him with last-minute reports, forgiving his forgetfulness when he missed dinner. I'd given him the benefit of the doubt every single time, because that's what love meant to me. Still, something inside me wouldn't settle. I reached for his phone, my fingers trembling. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but the unease was like a stone in my chest. I unlocked it easily. Mark and I had never kept secrets, or so I thought. The missed call stared back at me, mocking me with its simplicity. No voicemail, no text message, no explanation. Just Brianna. I scrolled through his recent calls, my heart pounding harder with every name I didn't recognize. There it was again. Brianna. Twice last week. Once just before dinner, while I'd been in the kitchen cooking his favorite meal. Another time on a Sunday afternoon, when he'd told me he was running errands. I told myself it was innocent. It had to be. He wasn't that kind of man. He couldn't be. But then I opened his text messages. And that's when the floor dropped out from under me. Her name was there too. Brianna. Message after message, each one short but intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. I miss you, she'd written. When can I see you again? Last night was amazing. Last night. My breath caught. My chest burned. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I scrolled faster, desperate for an explanation, for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. But there it was, plain as day. His replies. I miss you too. Soon. It's complicated. Complicated. I sank into a chair, the room spinning around me. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My mind raced with every late night he'd worked, every dinner he'd missed, every business trip that had suddenly come up. Every time he'd turned to me and said, I'm sorry, honey. You know how work is. How many lies had I swallowed? A tear slipped down my cheek, followed by another and another. My chest heaved with silent sobs as the truth settled in. This man, the one I'd loved for 30 years, the one I'd planned to surprise with the most perfect anniversary, had another life, another woman. I thought about the slideshow on my laptop, the photos of our wedding day, the smiles that felt so real at the time. I thought about our children, grown now but still so trusting of the love their parents had shown them. I thought about the laughter, the arguments, the quiet evenings spent side by side in the living room. And I wondered, how much of it had been real? How much had been a lie? I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the phone like it might somehow offer me answers. I thought about calling him right then, demanding the truth. But something stopped me. A small voice inside, the one I'd always silenced in favor of keeping the peace, told me to wait, to think, to plan. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the life he'd built on my trust, and the life he'd stolen from me. I turned off the phone and set it back on the counter, my hands steady now. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and made a promise to myself. I would not let this define me. I would not let him get away with it. And as I looked at the calendar on the wall, the one with our 30th anniversary circled in red, I felt something inside me harden. He wanted to celebrate 30 years? Fine. I'd give him an anniversary he'd never forget. After the midnight call from Brianna shattered the illusion of my perfect marriage, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, smiling, loving, a mask that had hidden so much. I spent the rest of that night pacing the hallway, my mind replaying every suspicious moment I'd ignored, every excuse I'd accepted. By dawn, the house felt like a stranger's home, the walls echoing with unspoken betrayals. When Mark finally came down for breakfast, he was all charm and warmth. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of my head. "You were up early." I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "Just couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice steady even though my hands were trembling. "Too much on my mind." He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't want to. He poured himself a cup of coffee, scrolled through his phone, and chatted about some project at work, as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I knew I couldn't confront him yet. I needed proof, something undeniable that he couldn't twist or explain away. The missed calls and text messages were bad enough, but I needed more. Something solid. Something that would tear the mask off for good. So that morning, after Mark left for work, I dug through the kitchen junk drawer and found the old file of household bills. It was buried under half-finished crossword puzzles and takeout menus, like a relic from a time when our lives were simpler, when I still believed in us. I flipped through the folders, my fingers shaking, until I found the phone bills. I'd always trusted Mark with the finances. He'd insisted it was easier that way, and I'd agreed, thinking it was just one more way to support him. But as I unfolded the pages, a cold dread settled over me. Page after page of numbers, dates, and times stared back at me, each line a small piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. I scanned down the list of calls, familiar numbers, local area codes, the kids' schools. Then, near the bottom of the second page, one number stood out. It wasn't local. I didn't recognize the area code. My eyes darted to the name listed next to it. Brianna. There she was again, the ghost that had haunted my sleepless night. I traced my finger over the call log. The frequency made my stomach turn. 3 times in the past week. 10 times in the past month. Calls that stretched late into the night. Calls made from his office. Calls made from our home. A sinking feeling took root in my gut as I realized these weren't accidental calls, weren't wrong numbers. They were deliberate. I flipped to the next page. More calls. More Brianna. Longer conversations this time, some lasting nearly an hour. I tried to remember what I'd been doing during those times: cooking dinner, folding laundry, reading Emma's school essay, living in blissful ignorance while he whispered sweet nothings into someone else's ear. My mind buzzed with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? How long had this been going on? I thought back to the work trips, the conferences, the nights he'd been too tired to talk, the weekends he'd spent working late. How many of those times had he been with her instead of with us? I flipped back to the first page, looking for any clue, an address, a name I recognized, but the bills were cold and clinical, devoid of the humanity that had destroyed my trust. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to calm the pounding in my head. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. I grabbed a pen from the counter and scribbled the number onto a piece of notepad paper. I stared at it like it might bite me. Should I call? Should I confront her? Would she even tell me the truth? Or would she protect him, like he'd protected her? The old me, the trusting, supportive, good wife me, would have let it go, would have waited for him to come home, smiling, with some perfectly rehearsed excuse. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I picked up my own phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number. It rang twice before going to voicemail. A woman's voice, warm, confident, just the right amount of friendly, answered. "Hi, you've reached Brianna. Sorry I missed your call. Leave me a message and I'll get back to you." I didn't leave a message. I didn't trust myself not to scream. Instead, I sat there at the kitchen table, the bills spread out in front of me like a crime scene, and felt my anger crystallize into something sharp and cold. I would not be the victim of his lies. I would not let him destroy everything I'd built without a fight. For the first time in years, I felt a strength I'd almost forgotten, a quiet, determined fury that hummed in my veins. I wasn't going to let him talk his way out of this. I wasn't going to let him lie to me again. I folded the bills, tucked them back into the folder, and slipped it into the drawer. I knew I'd need it later, like a weapon in my arsenal. And as I sat there, the morning sun streaming through the window, I realized I was no longer the woman who'd believed in fairy tales. I was a woman who'd been lied to, cheated on, and betrayed. And I was done pretending everything was okay. The phone buzzed then, a message from Mark. "Dinner tonight? Just the two of us?" I stared at the screen, my mind already spinning. Yes, I thought. Dinner tonight. Just the two of us. And a truth he'd never see coming. I always believed that a picture was worth 1,000 words, but I never realized that sometimes a picture could tear your world apart with just one glance. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening, one of those days when the sky bleeds pink and gold, and the air is heavy with that midsummer stillness. Mark was at the office, which now felt like a euphemism for anywhere but home, and I was alone in our kitchen, staring at the phone bill I'd tucked away like a forbidden secret. I needed more than a name, more than a voicemail that was all sunshine and sweet nothings. I needed a face to match the betrayal that had sunk its claws into my chest. So I did what any desperate woman would do. I opened Mark's laptop. It wasn't something I'd ever done before. Mark and I had always trusted each other, or at least, I'd trusted him. He'd never hidden his passwords, never locked his screen. But tonight, as I sat there in the quiet kitchen, my fingers trembling over the keyboard, I realized that sometimes trust can be the greatest weapon a liar has. I pulled up his email, the familiar chime greeting me like a slap. I'd seen him do it 1,000 times, checking work, replying to friends, reading the news. It felt strange, almost invasive, to be looking at his inbox now. But the anger in my veins burned away any guilt. At first, everything looked normal. Emails from clients, newsletters, the occasional forwarded joke from an old college buddy. But then I saw it, a subject line that made my stomach clench. Missing you already. It was from an email address I didn't recognize. I clicked it, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The message was short, but it might as well have been a dagger straight to my heart. Last night was perfect. I can't wait to see you again. Attached is the photo I promised. Love you. Attached. The word sent a shiver down my spine. My fingers hovered over the attachment, every instinct screaming at me to stop. But I couldn't. I had to see. I had to know. I clicked. The screen flickered, and then there she was, Brianna. A woman with honey blonde hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders, a smile that could light up a room. She was standing on a balcony somewhere sunny, the ocean behind her shimmering like a promise. She wore a flowing white sundress, the kind that made her look carefree and effortless. But it wasn't the dress or the ocean that made my world tilt on its axis. It was the way she looked at the camera, her eyes bright with a kind of love I'd once believed belonged to me. And worse, there he was. Mark. Smiling, relaxed, his arm wrapped around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. His other hand rested on her shoulder, his wedding ring glinting in the sunlight like a cruel joke. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like someone had punched me, knocking the wind out of me. I pressed a hand to my chest, willing my heart to slow down, but it wouldn't. The pain was too deep, too raw. I leaned closer to the screen, searching for some sign that this was a mistake. Maybe it was an old photo from before we'd met. But I knew better. He looked older, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, his hair dusted with the gray I'd come to love. This was recent. Suddenly the photo felt like a weapon, a final piece of proof I'd been too afraid to find. Every late night, every missed call, every rushed dinner where he'd barely looked at me, it all made sense now. He had another life, another love, another family maybe. I felt my hands curl into fists, my nails biting into my palms until they ached. The betrayal stung like nothing I'd ever felt before. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of shared holidays, of raising children, of building a home, and he'd thrown it all away for her. And then, beneath the anger, something else bloomed. Determination. I couldn't confront him yet. Not like this. I needed to be sure, to gather every piece of evidence so that when I finally laid it all out, he couldn't squirm his way out of it with half-truths and apologies. I clicked back to the inbox, searching for more. And there it was, a string of emails from Brianna, each one a fresh wound. Can't wait for our weekend. Did you talk to her yet? I hate lying. The kids miss you. My breath caught on that last one. The kids. Plural. I felt like the room was spinning. He had another family, another life. And all this time, I'd been planning the perfect anniversary. I stood then, my legs trembling, and grabbed my phone. I took a photo of the screen, capturing their smiling faces frozen in time. Proof. I needed proof. I closed the laptop, my hands cold and clammy. I didn't bother cleaning up the kitchen or straightening the papers that had fallen to the floor. I just stood there, staring at the photo on my phone, the betrayal in every pixel. Mark had no idea that his secret was no longer safe. And as I turned off the light and headed upstairs, I whispered a silent promise to myself. He wanted a celebration? I'd give him one. An anniversary he'd never forget. I used to think vacations were about making memories, packing suitcases, planning itineraries, taking photos that would one day line our shelves and walls. For 30 years, I'd believed that every trip Mark and I took, every carefully chosen hotel, Every restaurant reservation was a testament to the life we'd built together. So when I stumbled upon the reservation confirmation buried deep in his email, a forwarded message marked "Family Vacation," I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Family vacation. But it wasn't to the cabin we'd rented for years on the lake. It wasn't to the beach cottage Emma and Noah still talk about, where we'd collected seashells and roasted marshmallows by the fire. No, this was different. A luxury resort in Cancun, complete with private villas and all-inclusive amenities. The email was a simple, almost cheerful thing, one of those auto-confirmations that make you feel excited. "We can't wait to welcome you to paradise," it read, as if paradise were reserved for liars and cheats. I scrolled through the details, my eyes widening with every line. 2 adults, 2 children. Dates that lined up perfectly with the long weekend he'd claimed he was away on a work conference. I remembered that weekend too well, how I'd stayed home, keeping the kids busy with crafts and movies, telling myself he was working hard for us. A lie so carefully woven that I'd never even questioned it. I stared at the email until the words blurred. My mind raced with images. Mark on a white sand beach, a woman with honey blonde hair at his side, 2 children running ahead, building sandcastles that would never belong in my world. I tried to picture the faces of those kids, his eyes, his smile, the same smile that used to light up our dinner table. It was like a movie playing out in my head, a horror film where I was the only one who didn't know I was the victim. I clicked through his email history, desperate for more. And there it was, photos he'd sent himself, as if to preserve the memories for later. A selfie of him with the woman I now knew was Brianna, both of them wearing sunglasses and smiles. Another of 2 children, maybe 5 and 7, with sandy hair and gap-toothed grins, holding hands with Mark as they stood in front of a giant resort sign. Family vacation. The betrayal hit me in waves, first shock, then disbelief, then a white-hot rage that left me trembling. 30 years of marriage, and this was how he'd repaid my loyalty. This was how he'd spent the time he claimed belonged to work. I felt like a fool. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up worrying about his deadlines, the dinners I'd eaten alone, the excuses I'd made to Emma and Noah when they asked why Daddy couldn't be there. "He's working hard for us," I'd said. "He loves us more than anything." Another lie. I printed the emails, each one like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I laid them out on the kitchen table, the photos staring back at me like an accusation. I thought about the woman in the picture, Brianna, with her perfect hair and her sunshine smile. I wondered what she knew. Had he lied to her too? Had he told her I was the problem? The cold, unfeeling wife who didn't understand him? I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to make sense of it all. But there was no sense to be found. Only betrayal. Only the realization that the man I'd trusted with my heart, my life, had built a second home with someone else. I thought about confronting him right then, about waiting up in the darkened living room, the photos spread out like evidence in a trial. But I knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed every detail, every receipt, every scrap of proof. Because Mark was a master at excuses, at turning the tables, at making me doubt myself. And I wasn't going to let him do that again. I took a deep breath and closed the laptop, the photos and emails burned into my memory. I would gather every lie, every secret, and when I confronted him, there would be no escape, no room for him to maneuver. He thought he'd planned the perfect escape, his secret family vacation, his stolen moments in paradise. But what he hadn't counted on was me. The woman who had given him 3 decades of love and trust, now transformed into the woman who would bring his lies crashing down around him. He'd wanted to build memories. I'd make sure they were memories he'd never forget. If there was one thing Mark and I had always shared, it was a love of dining out. Over the years, we'd celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, promotions, everything and nothing, over candlelight and clinking glasses. So when he suggested we make dinner reservations for the night before our anniversary, I thought maybe, just maybe, he was making an effort to repair the cracks in our marriage. I wanted to believe him. He came home from work that evening, his voice light, his smile practiced. "I booked a table at that place you love," he said, his tone the perfect mix of casual and romantic. "The one with the piano player and the wine list you can never decide on." My heart did a little flip, the kind it used to do before the lies. "You did?" I asked, the hope in my voice too raw, too vulnerable. He grinned. "Of course. I thought it'd be nice. Just the two of us. You deserve it. Just the two of us." The words felt like a dagger wrapped in silk. After he'd gone upstairs to change, I pulled out my phone. I couldn't stop the unease creeping in, the way every sweet word now felt tainted. I needed to know if this was real, or another illusion he'd built to keep me quiet. I called the restaurant, my fingers trembling as I punched in the number. The hostess answered in that cheerful, polished tone I'd heard so many times before. "Thank you for calling La Bella Notte," she chirped. "How can I help you?" I cleared my throat. "Hi, I'm confirming a reservation for tomorrow evening under the name Mark Reynolds." A pause, the rustle of pages, or a click of a keyboard. "Yes, we have that here. Table for 4, 7 p.m. My heart stopped. "4?" I repeated, my voice strangled. "Yes, table for 4, she said, her tone unfazed. "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "No," I whispered. "That's all. Thank you." I hung up and stared at the screen like it might offer me answers. 4. Not 2. 4. I thought about the emails, the photos of him with Brianna, the children with their gap-toothed smiles, a family vacation that wasn't mine, and now a dinner reservation for 4. He was bringing them here, to our restaurant, to the place where he'd toasted our anniversaries, held my hand, and whispered that I was the love of his life. He was bringing her, and their children, into the space that had once been ours. The betrayal burned through me like wildfire. Every moment of doubt, every lie I'd swallowed, every smile I'd forced in the face of his excuses, they all came flooding back. I paced the kitchen, the walls closing in on me. I thought of Emma and Noah, the home we'd built together, the memories we'd made. How could he do this? How could he bring them here, like it was nothing? Like I didn't exist? I sank into a chair, the world spinning around me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash something. But instead, I picked up the phone and called the restaurant again. This time, I put on my best polite voice. "Hi," I said, forcing my tone steady. "Actually, I'd like to modify that reservation for Mark Reynolds. Could you change it to a table for 2, please?" The hostess didn't even hesitate. "Of course, ma'am. Table for 2, 7 p.m., all set." "Thank you," I said, hanging up. I took a deep breath, my mind already spinning. He was expecting to bring them here, to introduce them to his other life, like it was a normal Thursday night out. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated me. Tomorrow night, I'd be the one waiting at that table, alone, with every piece of proof I'd collected, the emails, the photos, the phone records, and I'd make sure he saw them all. He thought he could live 2 lives, that he could bring his lies into the place that had once been sacred to us. But tomorrow night, he'd learn that you can't keep a secret forever, and I'd be the one to teach him. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and drizzling, the kind of day that makes you want to curl up with a blanket, and pretend the world doesn't exist. I was at the grocery store, methodically ticking off items from my shopping list: milk, eggs, coffee, anything to give my mind something else to focus on. Anything to keep me from thinking about Mark, about Brianna, about the dinner reservation that had nearly broken me. I turned the corner near the produce section and nearly collided with Rachel, my oldest friend. We'd met at a PTA meeting when Emma was in kindergarten, bonding over spilled coffee and shared exhaustion. Over the years, we'd laughed together, cried together, and shared secrets over wine on the back porch. "Margaret," she said, her voice bright, but her eyes shadowed with something else. "How are you?" I forced a smile. "Good. Just picking up a few things." Her smile faltered. "Can we talk? Really talk?" My stomach tightened. "Of course," I said, pushing my cart to the side. She glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot, before leaning closer. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything," she began, her voice low. "But I can't keep pretending I don't know." My blood ran cold. "Don't know what?" She swallowed, her eyes darting to the floor. "About Mark," she whispered. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Did she know? Had she seen him? Had she been one of the people keeping his secret? "Rachel," I said, my voice trembling. "What do you mean?" She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something like pity and guilt. "I saw him," she said quietly. "I saw him with her." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "Where?" I managed to ask, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "At the marina," she said. "About 3 weeks ago. I was taking the kids out for a walk. I saw Mark there. He was with a woman. They looked close, and there were kids with them." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Did you talk to him?" She shook her head. "Number, I couldn't. I didn't know what to say. I thought maybe there was an explanation. I didn't want to jump to conclusions." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "You didn't tell me." She winced. "I didn't know how. You've always loved him so much. I didn't want to hurt you. But then I heard about your anniversary plans, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. You deserve the truth, Margaret, even if it's ugly." Ugly. The word felt too small to contain the betrayal I felt. "I should have told you sooner," Rachel continued, her voice thick with regret. "But I kept hoping it was nothing, that there was some innocent explanation." I closed my eyes, fighting the wave of nausea that rose in my throat. "There's no innocent explanation," I whispered. "Not anymore." Rachel reached for my hand, her grip warm but trembling. "I'm so sorry," she said. "If I'd known sooner, if I'd seen the signs, I would have said something." I pulled my hand away, not out of anger, but because I couldn't stand the pity in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me now," I said, my voice shaking. "I needed to hear it." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Margaret, you don't deserve this. You're strong. You'll get through this." I nodded, though my heart felt like it was shattering into a million pieces. "Yeah," I said, my voice a whisper. "I will." As I walked away, my shopping cart forgotten, Rachel's words echoed in my mind. I'd always thought I was alone in my suspicion, the only one who saw the cracks in Mark's perfect facade. But now I knew others had seen it too, had known, had kept silent. The betrayal wasn't just his, it was everyone's. And as I stepped into the rain, my hair plastered to my face, I felt a cold determination settle in my chest. I would not be the fool anymore. I would not be the last to know. And I would make sure that when the truth came out, everyone would see the liar he really was. I'd rehearsed what I'd say to her 100 times. Sometimes it came out as righteous anger. Other times, it was cold, detached. But when I finally found the courage to dial her number, my hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone. The number had been easy to find. Thanks to the phone bills and emails, I'd pieced together enough information to track her down. A quick online search revealed a social media profile with sun-kissed photos of her and those children, the ones who looked too much like Mark to be anyone else's. Every smile in those pictures felt like a knife in my chest. When she answered, her voice was warm, sweet even, like she was greeting a friend, not the woman whose marriage she'd helped destroy. "Hello?" she said, a little out of breath, as though I'd caught her in the middle of her day. "Brianna?" I asked, my voice tight. "Yes?" she replied. I could almost hear the smile fade from her lips. "It's Margaret," I said. "Mark's wife." Silence. A silence so deep I could feel it pressing against my chest. Then a shaky exhale. "Oh," she said, so soft I almost missed it. I didn't know where to start. Should I scream at her? Should I demand answers? But instead, what came out was something closer to a plea. "I just need to know the truth," I whispered. "Please. How long?" She sighed, and it sounded like a weight settling on her shoulders. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't even know about you at first. He told me he was separated, that you'd grown apart, that the marriage was over, just not on paper yet." A lie. A convenient half-truth that painted me as the problem. I swallowed the pain, trying to focus on her words. "When did you find out about me?" I asked, forcing the question past the lump in my throat. "About a year ago," she confessed. "When I saw a picture of you two at some event online. I confronted him. He told me it was complicated, that he couldn't leave you yet because of the kids, the house, the finances, but he promised me he would. I was stupid enough to believe him. A year. A whole year she'd known. And stayed." "And the children?" I asked, my voice trembling now. "They're his," she said. No hesitation, no apology. "He's a good father. He loves them. I didn't want them to get caught in the middle of this. That's why I stayed quiet. I thought it was better this way." "Better for who?" I wanted to scream. Better for her, maybe. Better for him, definitely. But not better for me. Not for the family he'd abandoned every time he'd walked out that door with a lie on his lips. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. But the words felt empty, a bandage on a wound that wouldn't close. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I loved him." I closed my eyes, the tears hot and bitter. "I loved him too," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "For 30 years. I built a life with him. I raised his children. And he threw it all away." Silence again. Then, softly, "I'm sorry," she repeated. This time her voice broke. "I wish I could take it back. I wish I'd known the whole story." But she had known. Maybe not at first, but eventually. And she'd stayed anyway. "I don't hate you," I said, and I meant it. The anger wasn't for her. It was for him. For the man who'd lied to both of us, who'd built a castle of deceit and invited us both to live in it. But I can't forgive you either. Not yet. "I understand," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I'll never bother you again. I hope someday you find peace." I ended the call and sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Her story didn't erase the betrayal, but it put a face to it. A woman with her own heartbreak, her own regrets. Another victim of his lies. And in that moment, I realized that the real villain in this story wasn't the other woman. It was the man who'd promised us both the world and given us nothing but broken dreams. I'd been living in his shadow for too long. It was time to step into the light and make sure he never hurt anyone like this again. It's strange, the way the mind can rearrange the past to fit a narrative you want to believe. For 30 years, I'd convinced myself that Mark and I had something unbreakable. A love built on laughter and compromise, the kind of partnership people envied. But as I sat in our bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, phone bills, printed emails, photos of another life, I realized just how much of our marriage had been a lie. I thought back to the early days, the way he'd looked at me across the candlelit table on our first anniversary, his eyes bright with promise. I'd held his hand that night and whispered that I couldn't imagine my life without him. He'd smiled and kissed my forehead, promising me forever. And I'd believed him. God, how I'd believed him. But now, every memory felt tainted. Every moment of tenderness, every shared joke, every whispered "I love you" carried the sour taste of deceit. I wondered how long he'd been lying to me. Was it a year? 5 years? Or had it started even earlier, in those little white lies that slipped so easily from his lips? I thought about the times he'd come home late, his tie loosened, the smell of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirt. I'd asked once, just once, about the scent, and he'd laughed, wrapping his arms around me. "You're imagining things, sweetheart," he'd said, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "You worry too much." And I'd let it go, because trusting him was easier than questioning him, because trusting him felt like love. I thought about the business trips, the weekends away, the conferences that never seemed to end. I'd stayed home, managing the house, raising our children, making sure everything ran smoothly so he could focus on providing for us. I'd believed every excuse, every reason he gave for why he couldn't be there. Because that's what good wives do. They trust. They support. They stand by their husbands, even when their instincts scream that something isn't right. Looking back now, I saw it all with terrifying clarity. The moments when he'd been distant, the times he'd pulled away just when I needed him most. The way he'd brush off my questions with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The way he'd change the subject, redirecting my attention like a magician with a deck of cards. I'd been so blind, so desperate to keep our marriage together, that I'd missed the truth staring me in the face. I thought about our children, the way he'd always been there for the big moments, birthdays, graduations, school plays. He'd stand in the crowd, clapping louder than anyone, his face a mask of pride. But where had he been during the quiet moments? The skinned knees and the late-night fevers, the parent-teacher conferences, and the sleepless nights. So often, it had been me, just me, holding everything together while he played the hero when it suited him. I wondered how much of his life with Brianna had overlapped with ours. Had he been planning getaways with her while I planned our anniversary dinner? Had he told her the same lies he'd told me? That he was trapped, that he was unhappy, that he couldn't leave because of the kids? The thought made my stomach turn. A marriage built on lies doesn't crumble all at once. It rots from the inside, the decay hidden by a fresh coat of paint, a new piece of furniture, a shared laugh over dinner. I'd been painting over the cracks for years, hoping that love would hold us together. But love can't survive in a place where trust is dead. As I sat there, surrounded by the ruins of the life I thought I had, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, heavy and relentless. But beneath it, a new strength was taking root. I'd given him 30 years of my life, 30 years of devotion, of sacrifice, of believing in a man who didn't deserve it. I wouldn't give him one more day. He'd stolen my trust, my sense of safety, my belief in us, but he hadn't stolen my worth. He hadn't stolen the woman I'd been before I became Mark's wife. I was more than his lies, more than his betrayal. I was still me. And as I folded the evidence back into its folder and set it aside, I knew that our marriage of lies was over. The woman he'd deceived was gone. And in her place stood a woman who would no longer accept anything less than the truth. I woke up on the morning of our 30th anniversary with a different kind of resolve in my chest. The sun streamed through the curtains just like it had on our wedding day, soft and golden, as if the world itself was smiling on us. But I knew better. That smile was a lie, just like the man sleeping next to me. Mark's breath was steady and even, his face relaxed in sleep. For a brief, traitorous moment, I almost reached out to touch him, to brush the hair from his forehead like I used to. But my hand froze midair. I saw the phone calls, the emails, the photos, and I pulled my hand back like it had been burned. I lay there and stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding as if it were trying to escape my chest. I thought about the plans I'd made for this day. Months of reservations and surprises, candles and music and his favorite wine. I'd imagined his face lighting up when I showed him the slideshow of our life together. Every memory carefully chosen to remind him how far we'd come, how deep our love was. But love built on lies is just another lie. And today, I wouldn't be celebrating 30 years of marriage. Today, I'd be celebrating something else entirely. The end of his deceit. I slipped out of bed quietly, my feet cold on the wooden floor. I moved through the house like a ghost, every room a battlefield of memories. The photos on the walls felt like strangers, mocking me with their frozen smiles. I paused at the hall table and ran my fingers over the framed photo of our wedding day. Me in white, him in a tuxedo, both of us grinning like we knew what forever meant. Forever, it seemed, had an expiration date. In the kitchen, I brewed a pot of coffee, the smell rich and bitter. I poured myself a cup and wrapped my hands around it like it was a lifeline. I could hear Mark stirring upstairs, the familiar creak of the floorboards as he moved about. My stomach twisted at the thought of facing him. But today was different. Today, I wasn't going to be the forgiving wife. Today, I was done pretending. I pulled out the folder I'd put together. Every phone bill, every email, every photo of his secret life with Brianna and those children I'd never met. The evidence of his betrayal, gathered like weapons in an invisible war. I spread them out on the kitchen table, each page a testament to the years I'd spent believing in a man who'd been lying to me all along. He came down the stairs with that same easy smile he always wore when he thought he could charm me. "Happy anniversary," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I stepped back, my arms folded. "We need to talk." His smile faltered, confusion flickering across his face. "Margaret, what's wrong?" I gestured to the table, to the documents that spelled out his duplicity in black and white. "I know," I said simply. "I know everything." His eyes darted to the table, and for a moment, I saw the mask slip. Panic. Guilt. But then the mask snapped back into place, smooth as ever. "Margaret, Don't," I said, my voice trembling with controlled fury. "Don't lie to me. Not today." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You've been living a double life. With her. With those kids." My voice broke then, but I forced myself to continue. "And today was supposed to be about us. About 30 years of marriage. But you've been building something else entirely, haven't you?" Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. "I was planning a celebration," I whispered, tears pooling in my eyes. "A beautiful dinner, a slideshow of our life together, a chance to show you how much I loved you." I laughed bitterly. "But you don't deserve that, not anymore." He reached for me then, but I stepped back. No, I said, my voice cold. This anniversary isn't about us anymore. It's about me, about finding my strength, about reclaiming my life from the lies you've told me. He stood there, speechless, as I gathered the papers and tucked them back into the folder. Today, I said, meeting his eyes one last time, I'm done being the woman you fooled. I'm done being the wife you lied to. I'm done. I walked past him, leaving him standing in the kitchen. The man I'd loved, the man I'd trusted, the man I'd believed in for 30 years. And as I stepped out into the morning sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. I'd always thought of La Bella Notte as our place. A small, candlelit restaurant with cream-colored linens, a pianist who played softly in the corner, and a sommelier who always remembered our favorite wine. It had been the site of countless birthdays, anniversaries, and just because dinners. The place we went when we wanted to feel like us. But now, every time I thought of that restaurant, I pictured Mark sitting there, his smile so practiced, holding her hand beneath the table. I could almost see the shadows dancing across his face, the flicker of guilt he'd probably hidden with a joke or a sweet word. I couldn't let him own that place anymore, not after everything he'd stolen from me. So I picked up the phone and called La Bella Notte. My hands were steady now, my voice calm, every word chosen with care. Hi, I said, my tone light, polite. I'd like to book a private dining room for a special anniversary dinner. The hostess on the other end was all smiles. Of course, congratulations on your anniversary. How many guests will be attending? I hesitated just long enough to let the lie slip out smoothly. Oh, about 15, I said. It's going to be a surprise party. I want it to be a night to remember. She laughed softly. That sounds wonderful. Let me check our availability. As she worked, I let my mind wander to the guest list I'd already written on a pad in the kitchen. Our closest friends, his work colleagues, even a few extended family members. People who'd known us as a couple for decades. People who'd believed the same story I had, that Mark and I were the picture of a perfect marriage. It was a carefully curated list, every name chosen with precision. People who'd understand the significance of what I was about to do. People who'd see the truth for themselves. Perfect, the hostess said, interrupting my thoughts. We have a private room available at 7 o'clock on the night you requested. Would you like to arrange a menu? Yes, I said, my voice even. Something special. Appetizers, dinner, dessert, and a champagne toast at the end. Of course, she said, her tone warm. Any dietary restrictions? Just one, I said, my heart cold as stone. Make sure there's nothing on the menu that tastes like betrayal. She laughed lightly, not catching the undertone. Of course, ma'am. We'll make sure everything is perfect. Perfect. The word echoed in my mind like a challenge. I thanked her, confirmed the reservation, and hung up. The phone felt heavy in my hand, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I wasn't just going to confront him in private. I was going to give him the anniversary dinner he deserved. One he'd never forget. One where the truth would be laid out in front of him like the finest course on the menu. I thought about the table, the flickering candles, the soft music. How many times had I looked across that table and believed every lie he'd told me? How many times had I raised a glass and toasted to a future he was building with someone else? Not this time. This time, I would be the one in control. This time, I would raise a glass to the end of his charade, to my freedom, to the woman I was becoming. I thought about the slideshow I'd made, the one I'd planned to share on our anniversary night. Photos of our life together, of our children, of the vacations that felt like lifetimes ago. I pictured adding new photos to that slideshow, screenshots of his emails, copies of his phone records, pictures of him with Brianna and the children he'd kept hidden from me. I imagined the looks on our friends' faces as the truth unfolded before them. No one would be able to deny it then. Not him. Not her. Not any of them. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was clarity. It was truth. I wanted every single person in that room to see him for what he really was. A liar, a cheat, a man who'd betrayed the woman who'd loved him most. I pulled out the invitation list and began to make calls. Each one a carefully planned piece of the puzzle. Each one a step closer to the night that would change everything. When I finished, I set the list aside and took a deep breath. I'd spent 30 years building a life with this man, believing in him, trusting him. It was time he saw what 30 years of betrayal looked like. He'd wanted a special anniversary dinner. I'd make sure it was unforgettable. They say the guest list can make or break an event. I'd always believed that was true for weddings, birthdays, even holiday dinners. But I never imagined I'd be using that same rule to plan the night that would shatter the illusion of my marriage. I sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet around me. The only sound the ticking of the old clock Mark's parents had given us on our 10th anniversary. I used to love that clock, its steady rhythm a reminder of time spent together. Now, each tick felt like a countdown to the truth. I started with the obvious. Our closest friends, the ones who'd watched us dance at our wedding, who'd stood by us through every milestone, every heartbreak. People who'd believed the story we'd told them, the one where Mark and I were the perfect couple, partners in everything. There was Rachel, of course, the friend who'd warned me at the grocery store. She'd be there, front row, to see the truth unveiled. And David and Sandra, the couple we'd vacationed with every summer, always marveling at how, in love, we still seemed after all these years. I added his colleagues next, especially the ones he'd bragged to about being a family man, the ones who'd always said I was lucky to have him. Let them see what luck really looked like when the mask slipped. Family was trickier. His sister, Elaine, had always adored him, always defended him. But she needed to see the man he really was, the man who'd lied to all of us with that same easy smile. I wrote her name carefully, imagining her face when she learned the truth. And then there was my own family, my brother Paul, who'd always been protective of me. I hesitated over his name, knowing this would hurt him almost as much as it would hurt me. But I needed his strength that night. I needed him to see that I wasn't the naive woman he'd always thought me to be. I paused over Mark's parents' names, my pen hovering above the paper. They'd always treated me like a daughter, always included me in their lives. But could I do that to them? Could I bring them into the web of lies their son had spun? I set the pen down and closed my eyes. This wasn't about sparing feelings anymore. It was about truth, about freeing myself from the weight of his deception. I wrote their names, my hand trembling. Next came the alibis. I couldn't risk Mark finding out before the dinner. He was too cunning, too good at spinning his own narrative. So I planned it like a secret mission. I called each person individually, my voice warm, my words carefully chosen. Mark doesn't know about the dinner yet, I'd say, each time the same rehearsed line. It's a surprise, our 30th. I wanted it to be special. Every single person agreed. Of course they did. They'd always believed in us. I even called Mark's assistant at work, asking her to make sure his schedule was clear. Tell him there's a last-minute meeting, I said, my voice calm. He's been working so hard. He deserves a night off. She laughed. Of course, Mrs. Reynolds. Anything for you two. You're the perfect couple. Perfect. The word made me sick. With every call, every name added to the list, I felt the power shifting back to me. For so long, Mark had been the one with the secrets, the one who controlled the narrative. Now, for the first time, I was in control. I knew something he didn't. As I hung up from the last call, I sat back and surveyed the guest list. Each name was a witness. Each name represented a thread in the tapestry of lies Mark had woven, and each name would be there to see it all unravel. I imagined the room that night, candles flickering, wine glasses glinting, polite laughter filling the air. And then, the moment the truth would hit like a tidal wave, sweeping away the facade he'd built so carefully. I took a deep breath and folded the list, tucking it into the folder with the rest of my evidence. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady, focused. Mark thought he'd planned everything perfectly, but he hadn't planned for me. And he hadn't planned for the night his world would fall apart, with everyone he cared about watching. The night of the anniversary dinner arrived, carrying with it a kind of hush that settled over the house like a final breath before a storm. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy silk dress that fell just below my knees, elegant, understated, the kind of dress a wife might wear to celebrate 30 years of love. Mark came home late that afternoon, his smile as practiced as ever, oblivious to the trap waiting for him. "You look beautiful," he said, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "Thank you," I replied, my voice calm. "Tonight's a special night." He didn't even flinch. The restaurant was warm and inviting, just as I remembered. Candles flickering on each table, the hum of quiet conversation filling the air. The hostess led us to the private dining room where the others were already gathered, a low murmur of laughter greeting us as we stepped inside. Mark's eyes widened. "Wow," he said, turning to me. "You really went all out." I smiled, but it felt like wearing someone else's face. "You deserve it," I said softly. As we settled into our seats, the guests laughed and chatted, clinking glasses and passing compliments on the meal. I watched Mark work the room with his usual charm, laughing with his coworkers, hugging friends, kissing his mother on the cheek. He was the man everyone adored, the husband, the father, the friend. But they didn't know the man I knew. When the main course was cleared, I stood, my hands trembling, but my resolve solid. I raised my glass, the crystal catching the candlelight and throwing it back like a promise. "Can I have your attention, please?" I said, my voice strong enough to silence the room. Mark turned to me, his smile expectant, eyes shining with what he must have thought was love. "I just wanted to say a few words," I began, letting my gaze sweep over the faces in the room. 30 years is a long time. It's a milestone, a testament to the strength of love, of commitment, of trust. A few heads nodded, glasses lifted in silent agreement. "And I've been thinking a lot about trust lately," I continued, my voice unwavering. "About the promises we make when we say, 'I do.' About the ways we show up for each other, day after day, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. I could feel Mark's eyes on me, that smile still there but starting to crack at the edges. "I thought we had that," I said, my tone soft but deliberate. "I thought we were partners in everything. But then I discovered that sometimes love can be a lie, a pretty mask hiding things we don't want to see." A murmur ran through the room. Mark shifted in his seat, his smile fading. "Margaret," he started, but I held up a hand. "No," I said, my voice steely. "You had your turn to speak. Now it's mine." I reached for the manila folder I'd tucked under my chair and opened it, laying out the evidence like a judge presenting a case. "These are phone bills," I said, holding them up one by one. "Emails, photos, all showing the life you've been living behind my back. The woman, the children, the vacations, the dinners." Gasps filled the room. Mark's mother covered her mouth, eyes wide. His sister looked at him like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. "I wanted tonight to be special," I continued, my hands trembling now but my voice steady. I wanted it to be the night I finally told the truth. Not the truth you wanted me to believe, but the truth you've been hiding. Mark's face had gone pale, his lips parted in shock. Margaret, please. I ignored him. This is the man you've all celebrated, the man who made us all believe he was perfect. But the truth is, he's been living a double life, betraying the vows we made and the family we built. Silence settled over the room like a shroud. I raised my glass one last time, my eyes meeting his across the table. So here's to 30 years, I said, my voice cold and clear. 30 years of believing in something that was never real. 30 years of loving a man who never really loved me back. I took a sip of the champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. And here's to the woman I am now, the one who refuses to live in the shadows of your lies any longer. Mark's eyes were wide, his face a mask of horror. I set the glass down with a deliberate clink and turned away, leaving the room in stunned silence. It was the toast he never saw coming. I'll never forget the look on Mark's face when the last mask slipped away. For 30 years, I'd believed that face. Every smile, every sigh, every furrowed brow. It was the face I'd kissed goodnight, the face that had watched our children grow, the face I'd fallen in love with. But in that moment, under the warm glow of La Bella Note's candles and the watchful eyes of everyone he'd fooled, I saw the real man for the first time. When I finished my toast, when I set down that crystal glass and turned to him, Mark's smile faltered like a candle flickering in the wind. The confident grin that had charmed me for decades was gone, replaced by a confusion so raw it almost made me pity him. Almost. He started to stand, his hands reaching across the table, as if he could somehow physically pull back the words I'd just spoken. Margaret, please, he stammered, but the panic in his voice was unmistakable. I watched his eyes dart around the room, seeking allies. His mother, pale and trembling. His sister, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. His colleagues, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The friends who'd always believed in the picture-perfect marriage he'd painted so carefully. They were all here, witnessing the destruction of his carefully curated life. Margaret, this isn't... He started again, but his voice cracked under the weight of the moment. I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving his. Isn't what, Mark? I asked, my voice cold and clear. Isn't true? Isn't fair? Isn't what you planned for tonight? He looked at the table, at the papers I'd laid out like weapons, the phone records, the emails, the photos of him with Brianna, and those children I'd never met. The evidence of every lie he'd spun. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I felt the room holding its breath, the weight of silence pressing down on us all. And in that silence, I saw the real Mark. Not the man I'd loved, but the man who'd lied to me, to all of us. The man who'd thought he could juggle two lives without consequence. He raked a hand through his hair, his wedding ring catching the light like a final insult. Margaret, he said, his voice hoarse. Please, let's talk about this. Not here. Not like this. I shook my head slowly. Why? So you can spin another lie? So you can tell me how it's all my fault? How I wasn't enough? How you never meant for it to go this far? I could feel the tears gathering in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. Not here. His eyes darted to the people around us, his mother, his sister, his best friend from college. Their faces were a mirror of shock, confusion, disbelief. He'd always been the star of every room, the man everyone admired. But now the spotlight revealed every flaw, every crack. Margaret, I love you, he tried, his voice trembling with desperation. You have to believe me." I laughed, a sound so bitter it startled even me. "Love? Is that what you call this?" I gestured to the evidence, my hands trembling. "The lies? The late-night phone calls? The second family?" His face paled, his lips trembling. "I can explain—" "No," I cut him off. "No more explanations. No more lies." He looked around again, as if hoping someone, anyone, would come to his defense. But the room was silent. The people he'd relied on to believe his stories were now watching him with new eyes, seeing the man I'd seen when I first opened that folder of betrayal. His mother was the first to look away, her hands trembling in her lap. His sister shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. His friends stared at their plates, the discomfort rolling off them in waves. And Mark, my Mark, stood there, frozen. He took a step toward me, his hands outstretched like he could gather me back in with a touch. "Margaret," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "Please, you have to understand. I never meant for this to happen. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" My voice was sharp enough to cut. "By lying to me? By building a life with someone else while I was here, raising our children, believing in us?" His shoulders sagged, his face crumpling like a man finally realizing the game was over. I didn't know how to stop," he choked out. "I didn't know how to tell you." A hush settled over the room, thick and suffocating. "You didn't know how to tell me," I repeated, my voice calm. "You didn't know how to tell the truth. Because every time you looked at me, you chose the lie. Every time you walked through that door, you chose her. You chose them. And you thought I'd never find out." He shook his head, his hands trembling. "Please, Margaret," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please." I stood then, the final act in this tragedy I never asked to star in. I gathered the papers, the photos, the phone bills, my weapons of truth. "I loved you, Mark," I said softly. "I believed in you, but I can't do that anymore." The room felt smaller now, the candles casting long shadows on the walls. Every eye was on him, the man who'd built a house of lies and invited us all inside. I met his gaze one last time and saw a man stripped of all his illusions. A man who'd thought he was untouchable, now laid bare before everyone who'd ever cared for him. And in that moment, as the room watched in stunned silence, I realized something. I'd spent 30 years believing in him, but it had taken just one night to finally believe in myself. He'd never forget the look on my face that night, no more than I'd ever forget the look on his. The man who'd always known exactly what to say now had nothing left to give. No explanations, no apologies, no more lies. Just the truth. Cold, hard, and undeniable. I had rehearsed the moment 100 times in my mind. How I'd stand tall, how I'd look him in the eye, how the words would roll off my tongue like they'd been waiting there all along. But what I hadn't rehearsed, what I could never have prepared for, was what happened next. Because as I watched Mark's face crumble under the weight of the truth, as I felt every lie he'd told me unravel in front of our family and friends, the door to the private dining room opened, and in walked the woman I'd only seen in stolen photos, the one with the honey blonde hair and the ocean blue eyes that had haunted my dreams. She stood there for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the shoulder of the little girl by her side. A boy stood next to her, his eyes wide and curious. Mark's other children, the ones I'd only seen in stolen moments, photos on the beach, videos of birthdays I'd never known about. Time seemed to slow, the sound of the piano in the main dining room fading to a distant hum. Every head turned, every conversation stilled, as the truth that had been simmering beneath the surface burst into the open. Brianna's eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, I saw the panic there. The realization that she'd walked into a trap she hadn't even known existed. She clutched her daughter's hand tighter, her lips parting in a silent question. Mark's face went from pale to ashen in an instant, his eyes darting between me and her, his lips working but no words coming out. He looked like a man caught between two worlds, and both of them were on fire. "Mark!" Brianna's voice trembled, confusion and fear warring in her eyes. "What is this? Why are all these people here?" I took a breath, steadying the fury that threatened to consume me. "This," I said, my voice calm but ringing with an authority I'd never felt before, "is the anniversary dinner he planned for me. 30 years of marriage. 30 years of lies." Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening. "30 years?" she whispered. He told you a lot of things, I'm sure," I cut in, my tone sharper than I intended. I looked at the children, their innocent faces mirroring the confusion and fear I'd felt just days ago. My heart ached for them, caught in the web of a man's deceit. Mark finally found his voice, but it was a pathetic, strangled thing. "Margaret, please," he pleaded, his hands reaching out as if he could physically undo the damage he'd caused. "They're not supposed to be here." I turned to him, my eyes like ice. "No, Mark, they're exactly where they need to be, just like everyone else who's believed your lies all these years." A ripple of gasps and murmurs filled the room. I watched as Mark's colleagues exchanged glances, as his sister's eyes filled with tears, as his mother pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Brianna took a step forward, her voice quivering. I didn't know. I thought he told me you were separated, that you didn't love each other anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, and she pulled her children closer, as if to shield them from the truth that was now undeniable. "Separated?" I let out a bitter laugh. "No, Brianna. We were never separated. We were married for 30 years. We built a home, a family. And all the while, he was building another life with you." Mark's hands dropped to his sides, his head bowing like a man who'd finally been defeated. "Margaret, I never wanted this," he whispered. "I was trying to protect." "Protect who?" I demanded. "Yourself? Your lies? Your ego?" He looked up at me then, his eyes hollow. "I was trying to protect everyone. I didn't want anyone to get hurt." "Well, congratulations," I spat, my voice trembling with fury. "Because you've hurt everyone." I turned to the children then, my heart breaking at the sight of their wide, innocent eyes. "I'm sorry you're here," I said gently, my voice softening. "None of this is your fault." Brianna wiped her tears, her shoulders shaking. "I should have known," she whispered. "I should have asked more questions. I should have—" "You believed him," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Just like I did. We both did. He's been playing us both for fools." A hush settled over the room, heavy and suffocating. The truth hung there like a blade, slicing through every pretense, every lie. Mark sank into a chair, his head in his hands, his body trembling. "I didn't know how to choose," he whispered. "I loved you both. I loved my children." "You loved yourself," I corrected him. "You loved the man who could have it all, the perfect wife, the perfect mistress, the perfect family. But that man doesn't exist anymore." Brianna turned to me, her eyes red-rimmed. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small, broken. I straightened, my hands trembling but my resolve iron. "Now," I said, my voice steady, "we pick up the pieces. We move forward, and we learn to live in the light, not the shadows he created." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I know," I said softly. I am too. The piano in the next room began to play again, the notes slow and mournful. I turned to face Mark one last time. This is the life you chose, I said, my voice cold. And this is the truth you can't run from. He didn't respond. He just sat there, a shell of the man I'd once loved, his secrets laid bare for all to see. I picked up my folder, the evidence of his betrayal now etched in everyone's memory. I took one last look at the man who'd destroyed the life we'd built together, then turned and walked away. Because in that moment, I finally understood. The real family was the one I chose to rebuild. Without him. Silence settled over the room like a heavy fog after the final blow had been struck. I stood there, clutching the folder that had become my shield, while the man I'd called my husband for 30 years crumbled before my eyes. His mother was sobbing quietly, her hands pressed to her lips as if trying to keep the truth from escaping. His sister had turned away, unable to look at the brother she'd once adored. Mark's colleagues sat stiffly, their eyes darting between us like spectators at a car crash they couldn't look away from. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, others stared at the table, their drinks untouched. And Mark, my Mark, was no longer the man who had swept me off my feet all those years ago. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He sat hunched over, his hands tangled in his hair, the weight of his lies pressing him down like a stone. The children, his children, stood by Brianna's side, their wide eyes brimming with confusion and tears they didn't understand. I couldn't bring myself to look at them for too long. Their innocent faces felt like the cruelest reminder of everything I'd lost. It was Brianna who spoke first. Her voice was so soft it was almost a whisper, but it carried through the silence like a confession. I didn't know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought I knew him. I thought he was honest. I let out a shaky breath, my throat tight. So did I said, my voice trembling but strong. We both did. Mark lifted his head then, his eyes red-rimmed, his cheeks damp with tears I didn't know if I believed. Margaret, he croaked, his voice hoarse. Please, I never wanted to hurt you. A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Never wanted to hurt me? I repeated, the words sharp as glass. Mark, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed me. You destroyed us. He reached for me then, but I stepped back, holding the folder like a shield between us. Don't, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Don't you dare touch me. His hands fell to his sides, trembling. I can explain, he began, but I shook my head. Explain what? I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of my rage and grief. Explain how you managed to live two lives? How you made me believe in a marriage that was nothing but a lie? Explain how you watched me plan this dinner, watched me pour my heart into celebrating us, while you were planning a life with her. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something, someone, who might save him. But no one spoke. No one moved. His mother let out a broken sob. Mark, she whispered. How could you? Brianna sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. The children clung to her, their confusion giving way to quiet tears. I turned to his sister, Elaine, who had always defended him, always believed in the man he pretended to be. Her eyes were glassy with tears, her lips pressed into a thin line. I don't know who you are anymore, she whispered, her voice shaking. I thought I did. But now... She trailed off, her hands falling helplessly to her sides. I felt a strange sense of emptiness in that moment, a hollow ache where love used to live. The man I'd shared my life with had been a stranger all along, his promises nothing but illusions. Mark finally stood, his movements slow and heavy, like a man carrying the weight of every lie he'd ever told. "Margaret, please," he said again, his voice cracking. "I never wanted this to happen. I love you. I love you both. I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Stop," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Don't say you love me. Not now. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't feel like betrayal." He slumped back into his chair, defeated. His head bowed, his shoulders shaking. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with tension, every breath a struggle. Finally, Rachel, my oldest friend, stood and came to my side, wrapping an arm around me. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. I nodded, the tears finally breaking free, hot and relentless. "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Brianna lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red. "I'll leave," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'll take the kids. I didn't know, Margaret. I swear I didn't know." I swallowed hard, looking at her, this woman who'd unknowingly shared my life. "It's not your fault," I said, my voice breaking. "It's his." She nodded, her arms wrapping around the children. "Come on," she whispered to them, her voice trembling. "Let's go." I watched them leave, the door closing softly behind them. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark lifted his head one last time, his eyes pleading. "Margaret, I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted—" I cut him off with a shake of my head. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "Don't you dare say you're sorry. You've had 30 years to be sorry. Now it's too late." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving him in the wreckage he'd created. Because in that moment, I realized that no apology could ever fix what he'd broken. No amount of tears or promises could make up for the years he'd stolen from me. The aftermath was a quiet kind of devastation, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. But as I stepped into the night air, the crisp breeze on my face, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. And with that freedom came the promise that I would never again let his lies define me. The house felt different that night. Every room echoed with a hollow ache, as if it too had been stripped of illusions. I walked through the halls in silence, my footsteps a steady rhythm in the emptiness. This was the same house where Mark and I had raised our children, where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where I'd kissed him goodnight and whispered, "I love you," more times than I could count. Now it felt like a museum of memories. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every worn corner of the carpet, a reminder of a life I'd shared with a man who'd turned out to be a stranger. I stood in the living room, staring at the fireplace mantel. Framed photos lined the shelf. Our wedding day, family vacations, smiling faces frozen in time. I reached for the one from our 20th anniversary trip to Maui. Mark had his arm around me, his eyes crinkled with that same smile that had charmed everyone. I'd believed that smile for so long. But now, as I looked at it, I saw the truth. That smile had hidden things. Lies. Secrets. Betrayal. I set the photo down, my hands trembling. Rachel had offered to stay, to sit with me through the night, but I'd declined. This was something I needed to do alone. To stand in the ruins of the life I thought I had and decide what came next. Mark was gone. He'd driven away after the dinner, his excuses trailing behind him like the last threads of a tattered lie. He'd left me alone in the house we'd shared, but the truth was, I'd never felt so alone even when he was here. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, streaming down my cheeks as I sank to the floor. I cried for the woman I'd been, the one who'd trusted too easily, who'd loved too deeply. I cried for the years I'd given him, years I could never get back. And I cried for the part of me that still, in some small corner of my heart, wanted to believe there was something to salvage. But I knew better now. I'd spent so many years smoothing over the cracks in our marriage, telling myself that every relationship had its ups and downs, that every couple had secrets. But not like this. Not a secret life. Not another family. Not children I'd never known about. No more lies. I stood, my legs shaky, but my resolve stronger than it had ever been. I walked into the kitchen, my heart steady, my mind clear. I pulled a pen and a notepad from the drawer, an old habit from years of grocery lists and holiday menus, and I started to write. Dear Mark, I paused, the words catching in my throat. I know now. I know everything. I wrote each word slowly, deliberately, letting the pain flow from my heart onto the page. You lied to me. You lied to everyone. For 30 years I believed in you. I believed in us. I built a life around a man I thought I knew. But the man I loved doesn't exist. The man I trusted is gone. I'm not angry anymore. Anger is too easy. I'm just done. I folded the note, my hands trembling, and set it on the kitchen table, where he'd be sure to find it if he ever came back. But deep down, I knew he'd already lost his right to come back. I walked through the house one last time, running my fingers along the walls, the furniture, the photographs that felt like lies now. Every memory felt tainted, every smile a reminder of the betrayal I'd suffered. When I reached the bedroom, I paused. The bed was still made, the pillows plumped just the way he liked them. I sat down and took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of his cologne that still clung to the sheets. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I let myself remember the good times, the laughter, the whispered conversations, the promises he'd made. But then I opened my eyes, and I saw the truth. Those memories were built on a foundation of lies, and I couldn't live like that anymore. I packed a small bag, just the essentials. I didn't need much. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not now. Not after everything. As I zipped up the bag, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for him to come home, wasn't waiting for another lie to drop. I was done waiting. I was done being the woman who held it all together while he lived a double life. No more lies. I walked to the front door, pausing to look back at the house one last time. The place I'd thought was my safe haven now felt like a prison. But I wasn't a prisoner anymore. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin. The moon hung high above me, bright and unwavering, like a beacon of the future I was determined to build for myself. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know how to heal the wounds he'd left behind. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never let myself be fooled again. No more lies, no more excuses, just the truth, and the strength to face it. I never imagined I'd be starting over at 52. At that age, I thought I'd be settled, maybe planning a second honeymoon, doting on grandchildren, traveling with Mark the way we'd always dreamed. Instead, I found myself alone, staring at a blank slate I hadn't asked for. The first morning in my new apartment, I woke up before dawn, my heart pounding with the kind of panic that made it hard to breathe. The room was unfamiliar. Plain white walls, mismatched furniture from a friend's garage, and a lumpy mattress that smelled faintly of storage. It wasn't home, not yet. But it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palms to my face, letting the tears come. I'd spent the past 30 years sharing a bed with a man who'd told me he loved me every day while building a secret life with someone else. I'd spent years making excuses for the late nights, the missed calls, the trips that always seemed to run longer than planned. Now there were no more excuses, no more lies, just the truth. And me. The quiet was the hardest part. At first it felt like freedom, like I could finally hear my own voice without his overshadowing it. But then the silence settled in like a heavy blanket, and every sound in that tiny apartment, every creak, every car horn, every neighbor's footsteps, felt amplified. The quiet made me feel small, so I started filling the space with the pieces of my life that were truly mine. I unpacked the box labeled Margaret's Keepsakes, things I'd collected over the years that had nothing to do with Mark or the life we'd built together. A journal from college with pages filled with dreams I'd forgotten I'd even had. A scarf my mother had knitted me in the months before she passed. A small seashell from a beach trip I'd taken with Rachel years ago, long before I met Mark. I arranged them on a bookshelf I'd bought at a secondhand store, each item a reminder that there had been a me before there was an us. I got a job. It wasn't the executive assistant position I'd once held at Mark's firm. No, that would have been too tangled in old memories. Instead, I took a part-time role at a local community center, helping organize events and fundraisers. The pay wasn't great, but the work mattered. I got to meet people who cared about making a difference. People who didn't know me as Mark's wife, but as Margaret, the woman who showed up early, who stayed late, who remembered the names of their kids. I started therapy. It wasn't easy walking into that office, sitting down across from a stranger and peeling back the layers of betrayal and pain. But it was necessary. For so long, I'd measured my worth by his approval, by the image we'd projected to the world. Now, I had to learn to measure it by something else, something real. I talked about the lies, the way they'd seeped into every part of my life, coloring my memories, making me question my own judgment. I talked about the nights I'd lain awake wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently. And slowly, I began to realize that I hadn't done anything wrong. His betrayal wasn't about me. It was about him. The therapist asked me once what I wanted now, what I wanted my life to look like. I didn't have an answer at first. It felt like every dream I'd had was tied to him. But over time, I started to find my own voice again. I wanted peace. I wanted laughter that wasn't forced, smiles that weren't painted on to hide the cracks. I wanted real connections, people who saw me for who I was, not who I'd pretended to be. I wanted to travel, not the way Mark and I had, always with his business calls interrupting every moment, but on my own terms. I wanted to sit on a beach somewhere, toes in the sand, a book in my hand, and know that no one could take that moment away from me. I wanted to dance again. I'd given that up after the first few years of marriage, when Mark would roll his eyes at the idea of dance lessons, dismissing them as frivolous. I wanted to feel the music, to move my body without worrying about how I looked or who was watching. Starting over at 52 wasn't easy. Some days it felt like I was standing at the bottom of a mountain, the peak so far above me that I couldn't see it through the clouds. But then there were days when the sun broke through, when I felt the strength in my legs and the determination in my heart, and I knew I could keep climbing. I began to find new routines. Sunday morning walks by the lake, coffee with Rachel at that little cafe downtown, volunteering at the community center, where the kids' laughter reminded me that joy could be simple. I got rid of the ring, the gold band I'd worn for 3 decades, the symbol of a promise that had never been real. I sold it at a pawn shop, the transaction quick and impersonal. When I walked out with the cash in my hand, I felt lighter than I had in years. I learned that starting over doesn't mean erasing the past. It means choosing to build something new on the ashes. It means choosing to see yourself as whole, even with the scars. At 52, I wasn't the same woman I'd been at 22 or 32. I was stronger now, forged in the fire of betrayal and heartbreak. I'd lost a husband, but I'd found something far more valuable: myself. And in that small, imperfect apartment with its mismatched furniture and thrift store curtains, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. It's funny how love can feel like both the most natural thing in the world and the most dangerous. I'd spent 30 years believing I knew what love looked like: a quiet home, a husband's steady hand, family dinners, vacations planned months in advance. I thought love was the laughter we shared at the breakfast table, the way he'd squeeze my hand when we walked into a room. I thought love was loyalty, commitment, the promise that no matter what, we'd face everything together. But love, I'd learned, wasn't always what it seemed. In the weeks after I left Mark, I found myself asking questions I'd never dared to ask before. What was love, really? Was it the feeling that made my heart race when he'd smile at me from across the table? Or was it the way he'd lied to me with that same smile, feeding me half-truths and empty reassurances while he built another life with someone else? I'd always believed trust was the foundation of love. Without it, nothing else could survive. But standing in the wreckage of my marriage, I realized that trust is more complicated than that. Trust isn't something you give blindly, because you love someone. It's something that has to be earned, over and over again, every day. Mark had taught me that, in the worst way possible. But in the aftermath of his betrayal, I also learned that trust begins with yourself. That was a lesson I'd missed for too long. I'd trusted him more than I trusted my own instincts. I'd ignored the red flags, the late nights, the phone calls he couldn't explain, the way he'd look away when I asked the wrong question. I'd made excuses for his behavior because it was easier to believe the lie than to face the truth. Love, I learned, isn't about closing your eyes and hoping for the best. It's about keeping them wide open and choosing someone who makes you feel safe in that honesty. In therapy, I talked about the lies. I talked about the nights I'd spent waiting for him to come home, the dinners that went cold on the table. I talked about the way he'd dismiss my worries with a kiss on the forehead and a promise that everything was fine. I'd wanted so badly to believe him that I'd convinced myself his words were enough. But love, real love, isn't built on words. It's built on actions, on showing up, on honesty, even when the truth is hard. One night, while I was journaling by the window of my new apartment, I wrote down a simple sentence: love without trust is just fear in disguise. I stared at those words for a long time, the ink bleeding into the paper like a confession. That was what I'd lived in for so long: fear of the truth, fear of losing him, fear of being alone. I'd thought love meant holding on, no matter what. But real love doesn't ask you to sacrifice your dignity. It doesn't ask you to question your worth. In the weeks that followed, I started to see love differently. I saw it in the small things. The friend who showed up with a bottle of wine and a hug on the night I finally broke down. The neighbor who helped me carry groceries up the stairs when my hands were full. I saw it in the way I could look in the mirror now and not hate the woman staring back at me. I saw love in my own resilience, in the way I kept moving forward, even when the nights were long and the silence felt like it might swallow me whole. It wasn't the grand gestures I'd always thought defined love: the surprise vacations, the fancy dinners, the diamond necklaces. It was the quiet moments of truth, the times when someone showed up and said, "I'm here," and meant it. I learned to love myself again, slowly, carefully, like tending a fragile seedling that had been neglected for too long. I started small: morning walks by the lake, a cup of coffee from the little cafe on the corner, a new lipstick that made me feel brave. I took myself out to dinner, sat alone at a table by the window, and ordered dessert first just because I could. I didn't need a man across the table to make the evening meaningful. I was enough, just me. Love, I learned, wasn't something that came from someone else. It was something that started inside me, something I'd given too freely to a man who hadn't earned it. I learned that trust, too, had to start with me. Trusting my instincts, my gut feelings. Trusting that I was worth more than the lies he'd fed me. Trusting that I could build a life without him, even if I wasn't sure what that life looked like yet. Sometimes, when the memories came creeping back, the way he'd hold me after a long day, the warmth of his smile, I felt a pang of longing for the man I'd believed he was. But I reminded myself that man never existed. I'd loved a version of him that he'd carefully crafted, a mask he wore to keep me in the dark. Now, I refused to live in the dark. Starting over at 52 meant learning to love myself enough to walk away from the man I'd spent my life with. It meant accepting that sometimes love is letting go, even when every part of you wants to hold on. It meant choosing to believe in myself again, to believe that I was worth the kind of love that didn't come with lies and half-truths. A lesson in love, I realized, wasn't just about learning to love someone else. It was about learning to love the woman who'd been there all along, the one who'd survived, who'd picked up the pieces, who'd started over with nothing but her own strength. And as I sat by the window that night, the city lights reflecting off the glass, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not for the man I'd lost, but for the woman I was becoming. The date loomed on my calendar like an uninvited guest. Our wedding anniversary. 31 years since I'd promised forever to a man who couldn't even manage honesty. 31 years since I'd slipped on that white dress, that borrowed veil, and believed in a love that would last a lifetime. In the weeks leading up to it, I couldn't help but feel that old ache in my chest, a bittersweet pang of longing for the woman I'd been back then. The woman who'd believed the promises, who'd believed in him. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't his wife anymore. And this year, I decided, the anniversary wouldn't be about him at all. On the morning of the date, I woke to the sunlight streaming through my window, no longer filtered by the heavy curtains I'd once chosen to match the furniture he'd picked out. This was my place now, a space I'd filled with the colors I loved, the books I'd always wanted to read, the little potted plants that thrived on my windowsill. I made myself coffee, strong, black, the way I liked it, and stood at the window overlooking the street below. Couples strolled hand in hand, parents wrangled toddlers with sticky fingers and tired eyes, teenagers giggled over their phones. The world moved on, oblivious to the milestone that had once defined me. I pulled out the calendar and circled the date in bright red ink. Not to commemorate the day I'd married him, but to celebrate the day I'd finally found the strength to walk away. A new kind of anniversary. I spent the morning at the small yoga studio around the corner, somewhere I'd never dared to try when Mark was around. He'd always rolled his eyes at the idea, muttering that it was silly, that it was for women who didn't have enough to do. But today, I moved through each pose with a grace I hadn't known I possessed, feeling my breath steady, my body strong. Afterward, I treated myself to brunch at a cafe I'd passed 100 times, but never stepped inside. I ordered pancakes with berries and cream, a small pot of jasmine tea, and a slice of key lime pie, because who says you can't have dessert with breakfast? As I savored each bite, I looked around at the other patrons. Some sat alone like me, others laughed in groups, some were deep in conversation. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I belonged. Just me. No title of wife or mother or widow attached to my name. Later, I stopped by the florist on Main Street, a little place with a painted wooden sign and an old-fashioned bell that jingled when I opened the door. The smell of fresh blooms wrapped around me like a hug. I picked out a bouquet of sunflowers, bright, defiant, unapologetic. Special occasion? The florist asked as she wrapped the stems in brown paper. Yes, I said, my smile genuine. It's my anniversary. She grinned, oblivious to the truth behind the words. Congratulations, she said, handing me the bouquet. I thanked her and carried the flowers home, their golden petals catching the sunlight like small bursts of hope. That afternoon, I sat in my living room with the sunflowers in a vase, their heads turned toward the window. I flipped through the scrapbook I'd started, a collection of photos, ticket stubs, little notes I'd written to myself. Not a single page was dedicated to him. This scrapbook was mine, a record of the life I was building on my own. There were photos from my solo trips to the coast, smiling selfies from the hiking trails I'd tackled by myself. There were notes of encouragement from friends who'd stood by me in the darkest moments. There was a pressed daisy from the day I'd taken myself out for a walk and found beauty in the cracks of the sidewalk. I added today's date in bold black ink, the day I celebrated me. As evening fell, I poured myself a glass of wine, just one, and raised it in a quiet toast. To the woman who walked away, I said aloud, my voice strong and unwavering. To the woman who found her strength in the wreckage. To the woman who refused to let someone else's lies define her. I sipped the wine, feeling its warmth spread through me like a promise. For so long, anniversaries had been marked by fancy dinners, bouquets of roses from Mark, and the carefully constructed illusion of a perfect marriage. This year, the celebration was simple. Just me, a bouquet of sunflowers, a glass of wine, and the quiet knowledge that I had survived. I thought about the years I'd spent believing that love was something you held on to no matter what, that marriage was a badge of honor even when it felt like a burden. I thought about the woman who'd swallowed her doubts, who'd plastered on a smile for the world, who'd made excuses for the man who'd betrayed her. She was gone now. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who knew that love shouldn't come at the cost of her own dignity. A woman who had learned to trust herself, to stand on her own 2 feet, to build a life that didn't rely on someone else's approval. As I finished my glass of wine, I realized that I didn't need an anniversary dinner or a husband's smile to feel whole. I didn't need someone else's promises to validate my worth. Because today, this day, I had given myself the greatest gift of all, freedom. And in that freedom, I found a love that no one could take away. A love for myself. A new kind of anniversary. One that marked not the day I'd married him, but the day I'd finally chosen me. So that's how it happened. A marriage built on lies crumbled beneath the weight of the truth I'd carried for too long. I learned the hard way that love isn't about staying for the sake of staying. It's about respect, honesty, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't demand you sacrifice yourself just to keep the peace. When I finally walked away from Mark, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I discovered a woman who refused to let betrayal define her. And though the road ahead was uncertain, every step I took was mine, no longer bound by his secrets, but guided by my own courage. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe. Because tomorrow, I've got another story to share, a tale of resilience and rediscovery that will remind you that sometimes the most important love story is the one you write for yourself. Until then, remember, you're stronger than you think, and every ending is just the start of a new beginning.